Hello, and welcome to Varn Blog. And this will likely come out at the end of the month, which is a year after its writing. But I've been reflecting a lot on the last couple of articles of Mike Davis before he died in October of 2022. In March of 2022, in Sidecar for the New Left Review, he left a harrowing vision of the future. Recently, a fan of mine asked why I spent so much time on Christopher Lasch when I could talk about Mike Davis and it would be more hopeful. And I said, I don't think Mike Davis was more hopeful at the end of things at all. Maybe you can count it up to a man who had lived his life and saw very little good come out of the various leftist movements he defended. And his last book, You and Him as Old Gods, was in many ways a hopeful book. But the immediate political scene in which he finds people attached in 2022 feels even more dire a year later. Let me begin with Mike's words, and we're going to read most of them. It's not a very long article, and it will be linked in the show notes. Does hegemony require a grand design? In a world where 1,000 gilded oligarchs, billionaire sheiks, and silicon deities rule the human future, should we not be surprised to discover that greed breeds reptilian minds? What I find the most remarkable about these strange days, as the thermobaric bomb melt shopping malls and fire range and nuclear reactors, is the inability of our supermen to validate their power in any plausible narrative of the near future. By all accounts, Putin, who surrounds himself with as much astrology, mysticism, and perversion as the terminal Romanovs, sincerely believes that he must save the Ukrainians from being Ukrainians, lest the celestial destiny of the Rus become impossible. The present must be smashed in order to make an imaginary past the future. Far from arch strongmen and master deceivers admired by Trump, Orban, and Bolsonaro, Putin is simply ruthless, impetuous, and prone to panic. People in the streets of Kyiv and Moscow who laughed away the threat until the missiles started falling were naive, not only in expecting that no rational leader would sacrifice the 21st century Russian economy to raise a false double ego over the Depner. Indeed, no rational leader would. On the other shore, Biden conducts a non-stop seance with the Diakotin and all the ghosts of the Cold War past. The White House is visionless in the wilderness it helped to create. All the think tanks and genius minds that supposedly guided the Clinton-Obama wing of the Democratic Party are in their own way as lizard-brained as any soothsayer in the Kremlin. They can't imagine any intellectual framework from declining American power other than a nuclear-tipped competition with Russia and China. One could almost hear the sigh of relief as Putin lifted the mental burden of having to think global strategy in the Anthropocene. In the end, Biden has turned out to be the same warmonger in power that we feel Hillary Clinton would be. Although Eastern Europe now distracts who can doubt Biden's determination to seek confrontation in the South China Sea, what is far more dangerous than the Black Sea. And indeed, has Davis not been vindicated in this? Sending warplanes to the Taiwan Straits and openly discussing American military intervention in Taiwan. After all, it was in America's interest to force China to seem like it was in Russia's camp unilaterally, despite the fact that the Russia-Ukraine war complicated a lot of China's goals. China, like most of us, thought the most we'd see was an invasion of Georgia-style slap on a wrist to restate a tense status quo. That is not what we're seeing. That is not what has been unleashed. Nor can anyone call the obvious obvious, that NATO has been baiting this for a long time, that Ukrainians have been used as a civil sacrifice, that its leaders are just as corrupt as they always were, but that there's no multipolar world in which some grand leftist vision of the future comes out of these kinds of squabbles. That's not just cope, it's actively delusional cope. If anything, the hope of a lot of leftists that they put in the expansion of Chinese power and a counter system to the U.S. has been stalled by this. and decoupling will have begun. And the American leadership, who, in doing the right thing after 20 years of lying in Afghanistan, can't imagine not having a Cold War or a war on terror or a crisis to justify itself, since no one either believes in the civic republic or the administrative state or anything other than some facile notion of their own collective corporate identity and some facile notion of some kind of identification with some semi-otherized people, of which everybody now wishes to claim. What do you think could possibly happen? Meanwhile, the White House seems to have almost casually chucked its weak commitment to progressivism in the trash. A week after the most frightening report in history, one that applied the coming decimation of pure humanity, climate change rated nary a mention in the State of the Union. How could it compare to the transcendental urgency of rebuilding NATO? And Trayvon Martin and George Floyd are now just roadkill, rapidly vanishing from the sight in the rear view of the presidential limousine as Biden rushes around reassuring the cops that he's their best friend, although while making sure that the black political class in South Carolina gets its Joe rewards by empowering the most conservative elements of the black electorate as the vanguards of the Democratic Party. If you wanted to empower the black vote that was truly representative of most black people, I don't know, maybe have Michigan and South Carolina go on the same day, but they're not doing that, are they? And it's pretty clear why. There's been plenty of progressive appointments to leadership, and indeed, Biden's been able to do something about this that, frankly, Obama couldn't. And in fact, Obama's appointments were often less progressive in their racial and gender demographics than George W. Bush, just recounting a lot of the old hacks and ghouls of the Clinton administration. But the idea that that makes it necessarily progressive in content, whatever the fuck that means, I'm not sure there is such a meaningful thing. That's nuts. How is Eric Adams that different from Condoleezza Rice in just making sure that you have the right ways to implement policies that keep people of that race oppressed? But now, at least since they're represented, they should feel happy about it. I'm going to quote Davis again. But this is not simply a betrayal. The U.S. left bears its own state of responsibility for the dismal outcome. Almost none of the energies that generated Occupy, Black Lives Matter, and the Sanders campaign were channeled into rethinking global issues or flaming a new politics of solidarity. And so much of they are now, they're about picking up different sides in a war's unilateral talking points. Equally, there's been no generational replenishment of the radical mind power. There's no I.F. Stone, Isaac Deutscher, William Appleman Williams, D.F. Flimley, George Greshly, Gabriel Kolko, Noam Chomsky, just to name a few, that was once focused laser-like on U.S. foreign policy. And when they have turned the policy, Mike Davis, I'm sorry, it's not a whole lot better. It's been basically treat stenography and battles over narrative control. All important, all things that even William Appleman Williams and Noam Chomsky talked about, but it's nothing comparatively. And we should ask ourselves, why would it be the case that there'd be otherwise? The one thing we could say about Chomsky and Williams and even Dutcher is they were protected by academia. 75% of humanities classes are taught by adjuncts, no protection whatsoever, no time, no other lives. Indeed, only those with the income to throw their life away on such fruitless pursuits would dare even do so. The people who spoke truth to power to the Democratic Party, the left that was truly independent, is gone. And as people like Davis die, there won't be a lot of people to replace them. How many radical scholars? Ta-Nehisi Coates' father was part of the people who liberated the COINTELPRO papers. Pete Buttigieg's father was a translator of Gramsci. Kamala Harris's father was one of the best Marxian economists that proved the internal colony thesis didn't really hold. But look at their children. Look at how they are part of this neoliberal and post-neoliberal elite. Even Marxists will tell you that we shouldn't be socialists anymore, that we should embrace barbarism or Bonapartism or something to bring back the vision, as if that was not the same desperate cope as following the Democratic Party into the abyss. Nor has the EU, for its part, conquered the problem of epochal characterizations and the foundations of a new geopolitics. Having hitched its start to trade with China and natural gas from Russia, Germany in particular risked spectacular disorientation. Yeah, it has, hasn't it? And it's only gotten worse. The Milquetoast Coalition in Berlin is ill-equipped, to say the least, to find an alternative path to prosperity. Likewise, Brussels, even out of temporary animated by Russian peril, remains the capital of a failed superstate, a union that has been unable to collectively manage a migration crisis, the pandemic, the strongmen in Budapest and Warsaw, an expanded NATO entrenchment behind a new eastern wall is a cure worse than a disease. Everyone is quoting Gramsci on interregnum, but that assumes that something new will be or could be born. I doubt it. I think that we must diagnose instead a ruling class brain tumor, a growing inability to achieve a coherent understanding of the global change as a basis for defining common interest and for formulating large-scale strategies. I would add to Davis that we don't even have a bourgeoisie that fulfills the bourgeoisie's mission, even in an entrepreneurial sense, that it's been structuralized to collect on the investments of its wealth from the mid-70s almost ad infinitum. And if you look at the list of richest families and not richest individuals, almost all who are rentiers, you won't notice the richest families, you see very quickly that the bourgeoisie is out to lunch with a few weirdos funding this or that conservative or sometimes even liberal think tank to distract from the fact that most of them just simply can't be bothered to care anymore. The managers have been left in charge, and the professionals are splitting on which gates they should guard, and the petite bourgeoisie are tired of being taxed and up in arms and tired of their communities falling away, while supporting the very robber barons locally that drain all the life out of everything they have. Even sex is disincentivized, but all people can do is blame one end of the equation as if one end of the equation could possibly be the sole problem. This seems like a distraction, but it's a sign of a society that is fundamentally not able to even breed interpersonal trust. And it is hardly unique to the US to see this. In part, this victory of pathological presentism, making all calculations on the basis of short-term bottom lines, which is written into corporate law, I may add, in order to allow the super rich to consume all the good things of the earth within their lifetimes. Michael Alindia, in his recent Capitalisme, les temps de la rupture, emphasizes the unprecedented character of the new sacrificial generational divide. Green has become radicalized to the extent that it no longer needs political thinkers or organic intellectuals, just Fox News and bandwidth. In the worst case scenario, Elon Musk will simply leave billionaires off of the planet. It must be the case that our rulers are blind because they are penetrating eyesight of revolution. Bourgeois are proletarian. They like the penetrating eyesight of revolution. Bourgeois are proletarian. A revolutionary era may dress itself in the costumes of the past, as Marx articulates in the 18th Brumaire, but defines itself by recognizing the possibility for social reorganization arising from new forces of technology and economics. In absence of external revolutionary consciousness and the threat of insurrection, old orders do not produce their own counter-visionaries. Hell, we can have insurrections all the time, and yet they are a perpetuation of the status quo that just re-empowers the same people in the same parties. Let me note, however, the curious example of the speech that Thomas Piketty gave on the 16th of February at the Pentagon National Defense University as part of the regular series of talks on responding to China, the French economist argued that the West must challenge Beijing's rising hegemony by abandoning its dated hyper-capitalistic model and promoting a new emancipatory egalitarian horizon on a global scale. A strange venue and pretext, to say the least, for advocating democratic socialism. DSA ain't much better, my friends, and neither are its frontist, sectarian, downstream trenders. Nature, meanwhile, is taking back the reins over history, making our its own titanic compensations at the expense of powers, particularly over natural and engineered infrastructures that empires once thought to control. In this light, the Anthropocene, with its hint of the Promethean, seems ill-fitted to the reality of apocalyptic capitalism. As any objecting to my pessimism, one might claim that China is clear-sighted where everyone else is blind, and certainly its vast vision of United Eurasia, the Belt and Road project, which has been scuttled since, not entirely, but largely since Davis wrote this, over war is unequaled since the son of the American century rose over a world-shadowed world. Indeed, the Belt and Road Initiative is basically the Marshall Plan, but for the whole world and on crack. But China's genius, from 1949 to 1959 and from 1979 to 2003, has been the neo-Mandarin practice of collective leadership, centralized but plurivocal. Xi Jinping, in his ascent to Mao's throne, is the worm in the apple. Although he's economically and admittedly advanced, China's clout, would also add that I think he has done something that was not done from 1979 to 2013, which was actually advocate for the rural poor in China. And I'll give Xi credit for that. But there seem to have been real livets, of which the pivot from zero COVID to back on stream really showed. You will notice the left is a lot quieter in China now than when than when Mike Davis wrote this about Xi. His recklessness of unleashing ocean nationalism can yet open a nuclear Pandora's box. We are living through the nightmare of great men make history. And unlike the High Cold War, where Politburos, parliaments, and presidential cabinets and general staff, to some extent, countervailed megalomania at the top, there are very few safety switches between today's maximum leaders in Armageddon. Never has so much fused economic, mediatic, and military power been put in so few hands. It should make us pay homage in the graves of Alexander Ilyich Ulyanov, Alexander Berkman, and the incomparable Slocum Schwarzbard. Davis was right in a lot of ways. We have over-relied on great figures, on Bonapartist histories, and on Bonapartist notions to get us out of a present which no individual, great or small, is likely to be able to get us out of, because no individual, great or small, brought us there. And while mass movements could control these Bonapartist figures like they controlled FDR, to some degree even limited Stalin, there's a real way in which the current situation of leaders are not particularly responsive. And we're left to see that they are also not particularly rational or smart, because our myth of great men genius has made us blind to the fact that both Obama and Trump are similar sides of a same coin. Which is not to say they are morally equivalent, but that is irrelevant, isn't it? Davis is gone. You will not have to see what's happened. But in this great rebirth of socialism, we see that we're further away than we were from even social goods like Medicare for all than we were in 1992. And the great socialist thinkers like to just shindig over who really supports Russia or NATO and who can do one neat trick in Congress to force national consciousness. As if consciousness raising, even in a term of a parliamentary or congressional trick, could change this situation. I've been telling you for 2 years to grow up. Mike Davis made his last writings a call for that. Another future is possible. but you're running out of time. And if all you can do is turn your back increasingly away from any hard questions, maybe time has already run out. Good day.